Don't worry, my internet's taking forever to go. Going. Come on, baby.
Hold on 1 second. I gotta get a water.
Don't worry, my internet's taking forever to go. All right, we are live. Yes. Come on, baby. All right, I think we are live now. Welcome to our podcast, Spiritual Intel Briefing. And we have Dana Coverstone, Pastor Dana Coverstone on with us, and John Redenbow. I am very excited to have you guys on and, talk about this. Where are we? It is now October, September, October. We went through September. We are now in this place where we are heading into October. And what is taking place? Where are we now? What are the headlines? And also spend the next, few weeks till election going over some of the questions that my audience, as well as John's audience, has questions to Dana about. John Redenbow put together, and he'll discuss this a little bit more, but John Redenbow put together an intel briefing based on Dana's dreams, and a couple more that he's had. And so he will discuss this. We'll give him some space also to kind of walk through this intel briefing along with what Dana saw and where are we at now. John, you want to introduce that, you and your work?
Yeah, first I want to say thank you, Amy. We appreciate just the opportunity for all three of us to be together. And I want to say right out the gate, because there's been a whole lot of discussion on Dana and his dreams. I've now had the privilege of meeting the man twice, being in person with him, spending hours together, sharing meals with him, talking about dreams and symbols, and plus time on the phone, looking at other dreams that he's had. And for anybody that doubted or wondered who this guy is, where does he get off with these dreams? It caused a lot of fear, blah, blah, blah. I want to say people need to know first and foremost, I honor this man. I thank God that he had the boldness and the courage to come forth when he did, not necessarily being a strong person in the dream community, in the prophetic community, feeling the conviction of the Holy Spirit that I've heard something that needs to be shared. I don't really know the format or how to do that. And he took the bold step, and he has paid a very dear price for it in his reputation, in his family, in his personal life. And just to dispel any, so we're very, very clear, 100% the dreams that he's had that I've looked at are from the Lord. They came from God. They contain very specific, actionable intel, most of them on a national level, about what is happening and what is going to happen. And in the first video that he did back June 24th, where he talks about 3 dreams, I have a 38-page dossier that I've put together, and it has 31 cross-referenced hyperlinked articles that confirm instances that have already happened in the mainstream media that he saw in the dreams. 31 separate articles, and there's probably over 100 if I attach them all. But just to dispel that. Now, the second thing that I think is important is dreams are in a lot of cases figurative. If we take a dream and we look at it as 100% literal, as a lot of people did, they looked at these dreams as a prophetic word, and they said, this is a prediction, this is what's going to happen, this is how it's going to happen. And a lot of people got very fearful about that. And I think people need to understand, when it comes to the art of what we call spiritual intelligence, first of all, it's pervasive all through Scripture. God speaks continuously through dreams, all through the Bible. He continues to speak today. There's numerous examples of everything from Einstein to Paul McCartney's song Yesterday to numerous plays, movies. There's several Nobel Prizes in physics that were won by people that got stuff in dreams. So there's no question. If there's a question in your mind whether God speaks or not in dreams today, there's probably some resources that we could give you. But for everybody on this call, we just so you're up to speed of where we're at. We know that God speaks through dreams. We know that God is speaking through these dreams in particular. And the point that we want to focus on is discussing what he's actually saying, what the interpretation looks like, and what the spiritual intelligence is. So spiritual intelligence, I define it as intelligence through other means, which means knowing something that you couldn't know through having sources in the government, or having somebody over here or somebody over there, or interrupting a phone call and listening to information that you wouldn't have access to. Dreams are a little bit different because we believe that they come from the Lord, and that they're particularly coded messages that will give you intelligence that there's very likely no way that you could have known any other way. So to Amy's question, I feel like one of the things that we have to do in order to begin to unpack the breadth of Dana's first video. Now, again, it took me about 30 days working almost full time to unpack this. So it's not something we're going to get through in one podcast, but there's some broad strokes that we need to hit on before we can talk about what's going to happen in the election or what this means. And there are questions that keep coming up that are reoccurring. One of the questions, I was just with Dana this last weekend, and somebody said, what the heck does brace yourself even mean? And I think that's one of the most important questions. And so I want to be able to go there, but I wanted to, if either of you had feedback on what we've said so far and what your thoughts were on the dreams and what Dana shared.
Dana?
I'm just honored that you folks have me on here, this podcast, because this is all new, still uncharted territory for me. And both of you reached out to me. Yours was the first interview with me. And I was as green could be when you guys talked with me. And I had never heard of spiritual intelligence in that sense. And since getting to meet both of you, and John meeting you twice and talking and going through the dossier, it's helped me have a whole lot better understanding of what I even had to begin with in those dreams. And I feel a whole lot more confident in that, and appreciate being able to, as you did, unpack it. I've had dreams since I was 15 as a Christian, but never anything like this. And so I'm still walking it out, walking it through. The dreams are shifting a little bit, they're changing. But I still feel that unction with them, that God's speaking to me about things that are happening in the nation. And so I appreciate having people like you that I can talk with, share with, that can help me understand it, because I'm still walking carefully, checking the ground in front of me and rethinking, okay, God, you showed me this, what do I do with it? And so I appreciate you guys helping me understand how to do that as well. It's it's helping me see another side of it, that I'm coming into better conformity with that and understanding it. But it was a learning curve. It still is.
We are excited to have you. My background is I come from an international ministry, several ministries that the government intel, NSA, CIA did contact prophets and look at dreams. Again, we are, and this has been, well over a decade that I've, have been a part of a ministry that on the front end sells books and teaches like basic dream interpretation, but on the back end, what they didn't know is how much the government did rely on that. And if a prophetic word would go out, say Perfect Storm by John Paul Jackson, you were going to get a phone call from a government intel agency. And, there was a time when, and John, we can talk about this in other, in weeks coming, is that the government did have and tried to put together a project for dream interpretation, but they could never catch it because you can only go so far with Jungian and Freudian intel, right? And so the spiritual intel that God is giving us dreams, and let me make it clear, Dana's not the only one having these dreams. I will say it was the first, and we pay attention. We're a dream ministry. It's what we do day in and day out for well over a decade. This is what we do. So we, as soon as Dana had the dream, or anybody has a dream, I wake up to like 200 messages, pointing me to the dream. So I hear them, and we like to align these dreams. We have the one of the largest portals in dream interpretation, where people put their dreams in, and we are able to aggregate the data and find patterns to intelligence. And we were able to see that that COVID was coming. We didn't have a name for it, but we absolutely saw it coming. We also saw oil falling. We misinterpreted it and thought that oil from heaven was coming and the anointing was going. Little did we know it actually meant oil was falling and crashing. We kind of misinterpreted that one. So we're not perfect by any means. None of us are perfect, but we are willing and able to hear from God. And my goal here is, one, for our audience to know that not only does God care about you and you personally and to give you divine strategy, wisdom, and guidance, but as well for a community, a church, a state, and a nation, and globally as well. And one of the things I believe that attracted me so much to Dana's dream was that a lot of the videos that I get do not go viral. So the fact that it went viral tells me that it's meeting a need in the community. And we did talk about that on our last interview. So because of that, and because of the interest in Dana's dream, and we will also be bringing up other dreams as we move along each week. We will be recording these podcasts until we've committed to elections. And so we can walk through these dreams and walk through some of the ongoing stuff, and we can align it with some of the dreams that we have in our portal. We can align it with other dreams that other people are having. And just a place where we can take, what are we hearing from God? What is heaven telling us? And how does that affect the elections? How does that affect where we are now? And for all the naysayers who say, well, God doesn't care about the elections, or, he's not a party, he does care. He absolutely cares. If America goes down, the world is in trouble. So the most critical election for the whole world. Right now, this is the most critical election. We need to hear what's going on, not only to know what's going to happen, but again, for correcting our steps and bringing awareness to what's happening, so that we're not caught off guard. And listen, none of us have bunkers in our backyard. We're not preppers. We're just pastors and ministry leaders that are going, hey, supply chains for food might be cut off. Y'all might want to get some food going. Hey, we need to make sure I personally told my friends, if you're in Oregon, get out, in Washington and Oregon and California, we'll go into that a little bit more. Just get out. What Dana's bringing is wisdom. It's wisdom. And we have to, and you align that wisdom with with your spirit and your heart and what God has already told you or has been telling you. It is to bring confirmation in something that we already know as believers. We already knew what Dana said was true in our spirit. That's why it went viral, because we already knew it. Maybe we couldn't verbalize it. Maybe we didn't have the confirmation for it, but we knew it. We knew it, and that's why it went viral. And so, John, I really want to talk to you. I know after we got done with interviewing Dana back in March, I believe, was it, already March or April? Sometime.
June, yeah.
That's what happens when you travel in an RV full time. You just never know what day or month it is. When we got done speaking with him, you really went into a hole in the ground, a bunker. You went to your bunker, and you spent an unusual amount of time breaking this thing down and creating a spiritual intel brief, basically, just like the president's daily brief. What I love about you is that you've got a lot of history behind you. You spend much of your days going through and looking for patterns and historical patterns, things, definitions, and stuff like this. I want to give you some space today to talk about what you came up with. And what's very important, you hit on something very, very important, and that is that you were able to back some things that Dana said with actual information, links to information. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? I'd like to bring a little bit of I'd like to bring some validity into what you spent 30 days putting together, ridiculous amounts of time, day in and day out, researching every part of his dreams. And then maybe next week we can go into some of his other dreams. But let's spend this hour talking about what you found.
Sure. Well, thank you. One of the things I love about our group is, Dana's a pastor and Amy's been in ministry for decades and decades. She's traveled, she's spoken at churches, she's done work in other countries, she's done work with people in government, with business leaders. But she's a known teacher in this space, particularly in the church community, which balances me out because I'm not really a church ministry leader at all. In fact, a lot of the dream work that I do is related to strategy work that I do with CEOs and with government officials. And so it's driven me into a little bit more of a niche in, Joseph in the Bible, when he interpreted Pharaoh's dream, he said, here's what the symbols mean, here's what the dream means, and now here's what you should do. And I call that part actionable intel. And it's something that's bothered me that I haven't seen a lot in different areas, particularly in the church world, is people don't press into what exactly step by step does this mean. When I'm working with a CEO who has a dream and who's deciding, do I close down this business and restart this other one? And then he has a dream. When I interpret that dream, he's going to make a decision on his business that's going to affect his livelihood and the lives of other people based on the intel that he's getting. And so I have to know that I know that I know that I'm hearing right and that this is right and that the directions are clear moving forward. So I tend to be a little dogmatic about things like source and authenticity verification. That's why it was one of the first questions I had to answer is, first of all, who the heck is this Dana guy? And is this from God or not? And so I went through and I started looking at different parts of the dream and saying, why did he have 3 dreams? Why did he have the first dream in December? Why did he not tell anybody except a few people in his accountability group? What did that mean? And I've been on a journey for a couple of years with some friends out west who have a very, very much a passion for spiritual intelligence as well. They work more in the area of the prophetic labs and working with things. They've worked, some of them are working with people in law enforcement, finding missing persons, so very, very practical stuff. And so we've talked about the idea of what it looks like to have source and authenticity verification. The story that I love going back to is in Daniel 2, when Nebuchadnezzar had his first dream. And he told those wise men, I want you to tell me the dream and then tell me the interpretation. And he did that because he was in the 2nd year of his reign and he didn't know if he could trust these guys. And he wanted to know, how do we know that I should listen to anything that you say? How can you prove yourself as being true? This, by the way, was the purpose of Dana's first dream, was to prove source and authenticity verification, that every single thing that he saw in the dream in December happened. And not only did it happen, there's headlines that prove it happened. And again, looked all this stuff up. We have all this information. We have all the hyperlinked articles. But one of the things that I felt was really interesting that I had to deal with right away was, is this literal or is this figurative? And one of the things that I noticed a pattern. A lot of times God will use patterns in dreams. Dana saw, and I want to talk about this a little bit later, but I want to kind of jump into some of the juicy meat of what's in dream 1. Is, Dana saw the calendar, he saw the finger. There's importance to all of that stuff. But after he sees the calendar and the finger, he begins to see a series of what he calls visions. And I thought it was really interesting that he saw visions within a dream. And he kept saying, I saw. Like he said it so many times that I actually started editing out, because he would say, I saw armed protesters. And I'm like, well, why did you say it 3 times? Grammatically it's wrong. So I'm like editing it out. And then I'm like, I'm just kind of asking like the Holy Spirit, why does he keep saying I saw? And I kept hearing the response was like John on the island of Patmos. which is the book of Revelation. I, John, was in the Spirit on the Lord's day on the island of Patmos, and I saw. And he was describing what he saw. Now, the Bible talks about in 1 Corinthians 13, now we see through a mirror dimly or through a glass darkly, which is like looking through a peephole, and you don't know if what you're seeing is real, if what you're seeing is a representation, if what you're seeing is something on media. And when he began telling his vision, I heard he's telling his vision, television, what he's seeing is what he saw on television. Now, again, this is a very important point because it goes to a lot of the criticism that Dana has received, because Dana went out there when he released his first video. He said, hey, listen, I got a master's degree. I read news from 40 different news sources a day. And there's a whole lot of people that came against that and said, well, you need to get your mind out of what the world's doing and what the devil's doing, and you need to hear from God. And I would kind of nip that in the butt, the whole idea of that. If you have to be 100% pure in intimacy with the Lord day in and day out to hear from God in a dream, no foreign king like Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Abimelech could have ever heard from God if that was the case. So dreams are more of a reflection of God speaking to you in a language you would understand. And if Dana is a news junkie, which I've been a news junkie too, and he's looking at all kinds of different sources and around the world, it makes 100% perfect sense that God would begin to speak to him in actual news headlines, and he would begin to show him things that may not happen literally, but are happening in the media. And so when he saw things like ambulances zooming by and people on ventilators and doctors with syringes, I felt in my spirit the question, John, have you seen any of that in the last 6 months? And I'm like, well, yeah, it's all over the news. And the question came again, have you seen any of that? And I realized I haven't seen one person on a ventilator. I haven't seen ambulances zooming by. I haven't seen bodies piling up in a hospital. I haven't seen any of this stuff, and nobody I've talked to really has seen it, but where they've seen it is in the media. And so I began to realize that when he says, I saw, what he was seeing, God was showing him the media representation of what would be happening in the first 6 months of this year. And when I got that revelation, I started looking up articles because he talked about how bad the pandemic was going to be. I found an article in Forbes magazine. I'm not talking CNN. I'm not talking, mainstream media that, frankly, a lot of their sources are suspect. This is a business periodical that estimated there were going to be 65 million dead in America of the pandemic. This was Forbes magazine. And I'm like, if somebody not knowing what we've been through the last month would have seen that as a headline in Forbes, they would have thought it was the end of the world. And so what I want to say is it's important for understanding is we understand that the media adds a lot of sensationalism. They like to add a lot of controversy. They like to throw the wildest, craziest thing out there because they get paid on advertising based on their ratings. So if they create controversy or sensationalism, they believe it's going to boost their advertising dollars. That's the purpose of the media. The purpose of the media is not necessarily to report the news. If you don't understand that, you're not going to understand Dana's dreams. But as we're looking at this, I'm saying every single thing that he saw was in the media already. It's already happened. And so that was the first lens that was kind of like a big, wow, okay, that made a lot of sense. And as if to put a punctuation on that point, I felt like I should count, which is weird, how many times he said I saw in the first dream. Again, the video has 3 dreams in it. So in the first dream, he said I saw 32 times. In the second dream, he said I saw 34 times. In the third dream, he said I saw once. And I kept hearing like, but John on the island of Patmos. And I'm like, well, 32 plus 34 is 66. Revelation is the 66th book of the Bible, where John was in the Spirit on the Lord's day and he saw things on the island of Patmos. And then I thought, just for my own edification, because I look at patterns and I kind of get, kind of track those things down. I researched how many times John the Apostle said, I saw in the book of Revelation. And he said, I saw 32 times, the exact same number that Dana saw in his first dream. So the only thing that does, it provides kind of that goosebumply moment of, man, this really confirms what I was hearing, that he was telling a vision of what he saw, and that telling a vision was what he was seeing was stuff on television. And these were the headlines that he would be unpacking. The other thing out of the first dream that's super important is we mentioned source and authenticity verification, the fact that every single thing came true, and we have articles to back up this is what the media reported on. This is what he saw in the media. It proves the hypothesis that what he's seeing is media headlines, but it also proves the source and authenticity verification of the dream. And then the third thing we're left with is what does this mean to us? What should we now do? And he leaves the dream at the very end, as he does with all three dreams, with the concept of brace yourself. There were some people that came out against him on the whole brace yourself thing too. They just like, well, that's not a strategy. And and the first thing I thought was, it's an interesting phrase to me for sure, brace yourself. It sounds like a plane crash, is going down, and the pilot says, brace yourself. It's like something imminent is going to happen. And I talk about by the way, in the dossier, the idea of imminency. Is this something that we think is going to happen, we can pray against, and we can stop? Obviously, the first dream has already passed. It already came true in the first 6 months of this year. It's recorded history now. It's not a question as to whether this is going to happen. We've already seen it. But the idea of what brace yourself means. So I looked up brace yourself in scripture, and there's 5 different places that talks about exactly what brace yourself means. And I was just going to go over just the actionable intel. There's 9 pieces. We can talk about what the scriptures are. People can look them up. The first 2 were in Job 38 and Job 40, where God speaks to Job out of a storm. And he says, brace yourself like a man. I will question you and you will answer me. So God didn't say that to Job because he wanted to know Job's heart. He already knew Job's heart. He said that because he wanted to show Job his own heart. Part of the purpose of these dreams is to show us our heart. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be the first one to admit, when I heard Dana's dreams, and Dana's like some of his thoughts at the end, and Dana's a Second Amendment guy, and so am I. My first thought was, you know what? I think I need to clean my shotgun, probably load it and put it by the door in case some people that I don't want in my house decide that they want to come in my house and do whatever. That was my first thought, which is a response out of fear. And then I felt like the question in my spirit, like, you haven't even interpreted the dream yet. You don't even know what this means. And your first response was to grab your gun. It kind of showed me the vulnerability in my own heart from all the chaos that's going on in the world. And I said, oh, that's true. Let me dig in. And that's one of the reasons. And I realized that the interpretation of the dream, particularly in dream 1, was not that I needed to grab my gun and I needed to arm myself, but brace yourself was particularly talking the internal posture of your spirit. And again, the first 2 verses were about God showing us our heart. He showed me my heart, and I had to correct my heart posture on how I felt about everything that was going on in the world. The third time is in Jeremiah 1:17 and 19. And I believe that this was for Dana in particular, but also for those of us that are put in a position to respond to things like these dreams and to say something that may be very unpopular. It says in verse 17 to 19, brace yourself, Jeremiah, stand up and say to them, whatever I will tell you to say, don't be terrified in their presence, or I will make you even more terrified in their presence. Today I have made you a fortified city, an iron pillar, and a bronze wall. You will be able to stand up to the whole land. You will be able to stand up to Judah's kings, its officials, its priests, and the common people. They will fight you, but they will not defeat you. I am with you, and I will rescue you, declares the Lord. So I read this, and I'm like, yeah, I think I can put my gun away. It's not really about me being, armed against whatever may come against my household. It's more about realizing that if God gives you a dream and says you need to declare this to the world, and most of the people in the world get afraid and criticize you and all of that stuff, you still heard right. And so the same thing is true, whether it's talking about hearing the initial dream, talking about the dreams, putting forth popular opinions like these are dreams from God and they're legit. And even some of the intelligence that we get into is probably going to be very controversial. God is reminding us that we have a job to articulate the revelation that he gives to us, which, again, thank God for Dana. We wouldn't be having this discussion otherwise. That's exactly what he did. But it also the promise, I have made you a fortified city, an iron pillar and a bronze wall. They will fight you, but they will not defeat you. I am with you and I will rescue you. That's huge. So the fourth version of brace yourself is the attack against Nineveh in Nahum 2, where he basically, Nahum the prophet is seeing an attack coming against the city of Nineveh. One who scatters is coming against you. Man the fortifications, watch the road, brace yourself, summon all your strength. I believe this is really interesting because Dream One, again, is a lot about the media presentation of what's happening. Whether people want to admit it or see it or not, I wish it wasn't this way. I believe that they have a destiny that's way higher when they're operating now. However, the mainstream media is one of the largest sources of division in our country. They are the one that is scattering. And what it's saying is, again, to have that internal posture of summon your strength. It's like telling somebody, hey, I'm going to send you in to talk to this person, and I want you to know that this person is a liar. So brace yourself, you're about to be lied to. That's a lot of what's being said in the first dream. We're going to see stuff in the media that is not going to be accurate. It's not going to be literal. It's going to be sensationalized. It's going to be hype. It's going to create fear. I actually started taking pictures of media headlines where they said specifically to be afraid. You know, be terrified because colleges and universities are rampant with COVID, or parents are afraid. They're like even using the word fear itself in the headline, which shows how desperate they are to be relevant in this day and age, even though they've been wrong on so much of what they've said related to COVID and related to other things.
John, real quick, I want to ask you, you know, a lot of our audience, and as well as us, we have not seen, we are not in the middle of crazy land, right? I live in an RV. I'm in the middle of nowhere, right? And so I don't go into the major cities. But what about the people that are actually involved, or their cities are in Portland, their businesses are in Portland? What if, you know, here are these people that really are involved, and they're in you know, downtown Austin or downtown Dallas or Chicago, Portland, you know, Kenosha. How does that, because if I lived in Portland, or no, and I will say Dana's dream did make my husband go buy a bigger gun, but no, here, listen, that man will use any excuse to buy another gun. So let me get that straight. But how do we, you know, there are two segments of our population. There are the population that is involved and in an unfortunate event that they're living in the middle of this. And then there's the other segment that has only heard about this. They don't know anyone who's died of COVID. All they do is see on television what's going on. They're only fed. They don't know how to go get alternative news. They don't know what, you know, if you're reading the news, I read the news as much as Dana does. And mainly being in law for 25 years, you have more of a political bit to you. And so, but I also read the headlines and the news to know what's not really happening. And then I listen to alternative news, and then I make my comparison. And that's what allows me to digest all that type of news and not get crazy, because I have a balance. Whereas there's a population out there that does not have that balance, and that probably should go get a gun. And I'm saying, you know, with what's on the horizon, and we'll go into this a little bit more. Actually, if you don't mind, I'll kind of go into this now. Stop me if you think I should not. But, you know, we had some intelligence, take it with a grain of salt, if you will, that said that upon election, well, we already know what Podesta said. Podesta, who's the campaign manager, basically said they've got a terroristic transition and that it will create riots. They literally told us what they're going to do on election day. And with that being said, with Podesta stating that this is how this is going to go down, then you've got, you know, Washington, Oregon, and California that are looking to secede the nation and giving up that beachhead. And I can absolutely see that happening. It's different for secession from Texas, because we're bordered out of Mexico. It's a little bit different than giving up a beachhead, because if you know anything about history, you don't give a beachhead. And the other part of that is, you know, one of the things that someone in intelligence has stated is that, you know, where on the East Coast, where the White House is, they've got there, it's very protected. And this person said, if anything came near that White House, they would shoot it out of the sky in a heartbeat. There is nothing that's going to happen to the White House or anything surrounding anything with the farm, CIA, anything, Maryland, all of that is safe. So where is it not safe? In democratic states, such as the three that they're looking at trying to have an uprising and an upheaval. With that said, you know, we're looking at elections coming. I would personally like to kind of go through some of the dreams later in each week and see if this, you know, is true, so that we can give some wisdom and guidance to people. You know, I would rather be wrong than dead all day long. I would rather get some guns, some ammunition, and some food supply, and look crazy to my neighbors than to not have food for my kids and possibly be dead. So.
And Amy, if I can add something, I've had over 10,000 people, literally 10,000 people that have contacted me and said, your dreams resonated with us, but here's why: because we already sensed that something was coming, something big, and typically it was something negative, something hard. And so it wasn't a shock or a surprise to at least 10,000 people. And I'm still getting hundreds of emails a day, phone calls like you can't believe. But it resonated with people who sensed that there was something going on. It touched a niche, because they're like, we knew something was going on and now we have something to go by. I had no idea of that. And so when John was talking about the brace yourself aspect in there, you're talking about the things that are going on. It let people know, okay, yeah, I'm not alone in this. And most of the emails start off with, thank you for saying that, because now it justifies what I've been feeling all this time. So where we are as a nation, it was, you know, at that moment, it was confirming with people what they were feeling, that something's going on. So I appreciate that aspect of what you guys are talking about with this.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it is hitting, and I believe that's, again, I'm gonna say that again, it's why it went viral, because it was the most, for me, the three dreams were the most comprehensive. Instead of one dream here, one dream here, one dream here, it was the most comprehensive and put together. Why you know, you were open to it and tuned in, and it's like heaven looks around and gazes and goes, oh, that person's paying attention, let's send it in, and usually uses the most unlikely people to do that with, because those who have ears to hear. And again, our goal here is, one, for us to know as a body of Christ that God still speaks to us in dreams, can warn us and give us wisdom. And again, we've said this before, we have to be the hope unto the nations. This is what we were created for. We were created in this time. And if you don't think in crazy land will happen, go look at history. If you think we're going to live in la la land and, you know, there's nothing to brace ourselves over, you've got light and dark absolutely coming to a complete battle. And America's in the middle of it. So there are two different types. There are two segments of our country, and that's those who have only seen anything on the media, but they live in rural areas. They're not, they have not been touched by this. And then you've got the ones whose businesses are in crisis. You've got governments who've shut us down, businesses from all over the United States, based on false data, have come crashing down. You know, what hope can we give them, and say, how do we arise from these ashes? How do we arise from these ashes?
Well, that's really good. And I think one of the, it's kind of like a strict dogmatic posture that I've had to take, is I kind of set myself at the beginning, before I knew who Dana was, at the beginning of COVID, I had written a dossier on dreams that have happened last year, 4 dreams. It took me probably 100 hours to put this thing together. It showed me some very alarming things behind the curtain of stuff that was happening in politics. I've shared that with maybe 2 people. When COVID started, I started with a group of people that I've had as part of my Dream Lab, and I launched the Coronavirus Intelligence Project, where I set my heart to listen to what the Lord was saying. And so I started looking at all of the main prophetic voices of our time, all the prophetic dreamers, the prophets that were saying things, that were putting things out, people that are known, that are reputable, that have given words to presidents and kings all over the world. And so I started tuning out the news and tuning in to sources of what I believe are people that can hear things from God. They don't necessarily know what they mean, frankly, and even a lot of prophecy, which is, people don't really understand this. A lot of prophecy needs to be interpreted as well, but we collected over 50 prophetic words and 158 dreams related specifically to what was happening during COVID and the Coronavirus Intelligence Project. And then Dana had his, and I kind of went off on the whole Dana thing because I felt there was so much heat on it. And I spent kind of dropped everything else, spent 30 days looking at these 3 dreams because I felt it was so relevant to our time. But I think one of the things that you have to do when you set your mind to hear from a different level of information, then it doesn't become just a data point. I watch videos, I read books, I read historical books about, intelligence, about autobiographies, about all of this, but almost every single thing I'm reading or watching right now, unless it's just I want to catch a movie or whatever, is related to stuff either I saw directly in dreams or other people have seen. I've read at least 2, maybe 3 books just from Dana's 3 dreams, just related to symbols that he saw in the dream. I'll get a book on it and I'll read the entire book. And it's extremely relevant historically of some of the symbols that he's seen. But probably unlike anybody else that I know, I've set my heart to listen to a different tone and a different piece of intelligence. Now, at the same time, I don't shut out the rest of the world. So I will peruse through the news, but I'll go look for things that people are seeing in dreams. Dana saw armed protesters. So Google armed protesters. Guess what? There's multiple articles about armed protesters in March, in April. It's not talking about, when he thought armed protesters, the vision that I saw in my head was a group of Antifa carrying AR-15s and a group of good old boy Michigan militia guys carrying AR-15s and then going to all out war in the streets with hundreds dead. That was the image I saw in my mind. That's not what he said. That's not what the dream said. And when I looked up armed protesters, there's already been incidents of armed protesters, but in a lot of the cases, nobody was shot at all. He didn't say an all-out war. He said armed protesters, but my mind went, and see, that's cognitive bias. And one of the things that I'm learning to tune out is when we hear something that somebody sees in a dream. He said Russian and Chinese soldiers. The first thing I'm thinking is the movie Red Dawn. Russia paratrooper commandos coming in and invading schools. And I think that's where a lot of people went because it created so much fear. But when we realized what that symbol meant, and it meant election interference due to hackers, then we can say, okay, this is what this symbol means, and it's not this. So if it's not this, we don't need to buy guns. If it's not this, if God is saying brace yourself means you need to be in a heart posture to know you're going to see some disturbing things, mainly through the media. You may never see any of this in real life at all. But when you do, you need to know that I am your protector and I have you, and that is your heart posture. I'm not saying people shouldn't exercise their Second Amendment rights. I'm saying the dream doesn't say buy guns. And so people need to understand and know that. Does this mean all Christians should be armed? Christians can be armed if anybody can be armed if they want to be armed. What I'm telling you is the interpretation of the dream is God said, they will fight against you, but I have your back. You are a fortified city, a bronze pillar, and an iron wall. So it's okay if people want to exercise that. But what I want to hear and I want to be purely dogmatic about is what exactly are the symbols saying? Are they saying our country is going to be invaded by other countries? In the sense of a military invasion, I do not believe that to be the case.
Well, it's interesting because one of the, because of Podesta's information that came out that said, we'll stand up and there will not be an easy transition, meaning what they're looking at happening is that Trump will not be called. Biden will win. Watch Minnesota or Michigan, because that's where the fraudulent ballots will take place. Washington, Oregon, California will try to secede, and that's where the UN comes in. The UN will come in to stand up beside them and their right to exit stage left. And that now, what is interesting, I know we didn't kind of want to bring up Q. As you know, I have spent since day one, when we saw Q drop posts from day one, I've researched, and I am not a conspiracy theorist. Again, we don't have bunkers in our backyard. I am well informed because I work in trafficking, human trafficking, as an investigator for many, many years. And I am on the back channels because that's how we learn our comms. We did see Q post, and at first we were like, this person, who is this person? But we watched, and it probably was until about maybe 6 months later after the team started proofing themselves, that we gave any credence to it whatsoever. With that being said, on a Q&A with the Anons, someone had asked Q, which is a military operation, it's back channel military operation, will there be a civil unrest? Will there be a civil war? And it was very clear, no, we have the playbook. With that being said, part of the playbook, you can know the playbook, and we have the playbook. We have exactly, Q posts have dropped, we have exactly what's going to happen. But again, we have a president who allowed the governors in all of the states to make their own decisions, which expose their hand. Right? Expose their hand. And it looks as though the UN, again, I'm going to leave this here. We may be right and we may be wrong, but it goes to Dana's dream, is that how will the UN become involved? And interestingly enough, 2 military assets have released that information as a warning, one to just family members and one publicly, that's how they're going to come in. And I agree with you, John, that, I think when Dana released the dream, people heard China and Russia in the streets. Well, we do have China in the streets. If you look at it, we've got China all through our universities, like the Confucius and Copernicus. They're just being found out everywhere. We just had someone arrested in I think it was the New York police that was a Chinese operative. We also had Senator Dianne Feinstein's 20-year chauffeur driver who was a Chinese source. So they are in the streets. I think what we have to be prepared for is, one, we have to look at things literally and go, will they come in and have an uprising? That is very possible. Look at what's happening now. Look at Antifa, BAM, BAMN, look them up. BAM, Antifa, which is the mother organization over Antifa and Black Lives Matter. We know that they're funded. We know these things are funded. When we say China in the streets, you have to understand the Chinese have been in our universities forever. So these kids in the streets, on behalf of, funded by China. Does it look like China is in the streets, and are we looking at a civil war like that? Maybe, maybe not, but maybe not. Maybe it's symbolic to them being in our streets through hacking, digitally speaking. We know China's in the streets because we literally just had WeChat and TikTok and ZTE and Huang, start to cancel out. He's like shutting these companies down because China's in our household. China's in our household with ZTE, with products. So we can look at it and go, yeah, Dana's absolutely right. We should all know that. That's in the headlines. That's 100%. But what does that look like, China and Russia in the street? What does that look like? I do want to ask, and
That's a good question.
I think I do want to ask Dana. We're coming up on October. Talk a little bit about
let me answer the question about China and Russia in the streets, because I think the idea that a lot of people have in dream interpretation is well, it could be this or it could be this. I tend to disagree. I think God will let us know this is either literal or it's not. And we need to know if there's going to be foreign troops on US soil, our response is going to be different than if it means that there's hackers trying to influence the election.
Correct.
The response is the same either way, and our heart posture needs to be one of trusting God and not responding out of fear. But there is an answer to this question. And if you look at the actual context of the dream, and I'm going to read a little bit, we were talking about the first dream, and I want to go back there because there's a point I want to make after this point. But this about the Russian and Chinese soldiers is in the second dream. And in the middle of the second dream, I'm not going to read the whole thing. He says, Dana said, I saw armed protesters. I saw fighting in the streets. I saw people pummeling one another. I've already seen all that, multiple headlines and every one of those things. I saw businesses shuttered and shut up. I saw schools closed. Okay, all of that, we can say that's 100% literal. Then next paragraph, he says, I saw banks with the roofs being taken off, almost like an alien abduction. So he's describing something that probably is not literal, but is figurative. And I saw money flying out of the roof like some type of vacuum cleaner. And he even says, clearly I'm seeing a transfer of wealth. So he knew that it was figurative, and he was even beginning to get some revelation on what it meant. But right after that, he said, I saw politicians in back rooms. I saw fires. I saw Chinese and Russian soldiers on the ground. Russian soldiers would tell the Chinese to go and pick these people up, round up these people, secure this quadrant, secure this area. I saw blue helmets of the UN. I saw military things taking place. And so I'm like, that deserves an answer. Like, we need to press into that, because that was a point of fear for a whole lot of people. And so I dug into that, and I'm just going to read so we have the intelligence that we got. I said it's important to understand that we are clearly in a figurative part of the dream. When he starts talking about aliens ripping off the roofs of banks, we're not talking about literal headlines anymore. So it's important to understand we're clearly in a figurative part of the dream, and this portion also does not have the headlines feel as it had before. So there's a shift in the language, which is important. People being rounded up has immediately a figurative connotation. One is people being collected, classified, or tallied, as in aligned into groups by thought, like identity politics, like black versus white, rich versus poor, Republican versus Democrat, female versus male, all of that stuff. They're rounding these people up into groups. We also saw this in the last presidential election, that there was Russian interference through social media to influence the minds of people, particularly into particular schools of thought. Second, rounding up is figurative. It's a way of describing padding the numbers, particularly related to polls. We saw this in the 2016 election by the sheer surprise of all the news organizations on election night and their absolute failure to predict the outcome. The language of rounding people up, securing quadrants, securing areas speaks to geographic locations such as swing states and areas of influence such as family, entertainment, government, and religion. We are already seeing and continue to see state-sponsored hackers, foot soldiers, involved in our country in this election cycle. We've seen tensions in international relations related to the sources of the coronavirus, the removal of the United States from the WHO, and without a doubt, foreign countries from Russia to China, and there's even articles about Iran, are at the very top of the list, influencing our elections, and will continue through targeted media campaigns and attempt to collect people through inaccurate news, poll results, divisive videos, and even memes. We recognize that a more literal version of the dream is possible, but the transition into the figurative language and a non-headline script is more indicative of the scenario, which we've already proven true. So again, this is classic spiritual intelligence, where we have to look at the data and we have to say, is this possible? And then we have to make a determination. And the determination I'm making is not, well, what did I hear from this intelligence source, or what did Podesta say, or those are data points, but I'm looking particularly at the figurative transition in the dream from literal headlines to a figurative discussion. And so that's where I made the determination. And in my dossier, I make the call that Russian and Chinese soldiers is not literal. The UN is not going to invade and send troops. I don't think our president would allow it for a second. And so it has to mean something different. And then I believe that God has showed us what this means, which we've already been able to say, well, if this is true, if foot soldiers are hackers, we would be able to see this. And everything from the Senate Intelligence Committee to all of the main media sources are saying this has been released. I have no less than 5 different articles hyperlinked here that say that there's foreign election interference in this election already. So I think people need to have their hearts positioned, and they need to have the answers. Now, it's not to say that it couldn't happen the other way, but what I'm saying is the information doesn't lead to that conclusion. So if we go in our minds to foreign troops are going to invade, oh my gosh, people start having panic attacks, they start having heart attacks, and what that is the spirit of fear. One of the things that Dana saw in the first dream and the second dream, in the first dream, he saw vultures circling. Vulture circling is the spirit of fear. It's indicative of impending doom. It's not impending doom. Most of the time in movies, when vultures circle, nobody's even died yet, but it's the guy who stumbles in the desert, who's famished, who doesn't have any water, and he lays down exhausted. Now, 99% of the time, the guy never dies. Somebody comes along on a horse, throws him on the back of the horse and takes him to town. But the vultures are circling, which means impending doom. In the second dream, though, he saw, instead of vultures, he saw gargoyles, which is a much stronger version of fear. But again, it's spiritual warfare. It's not fear. I don't think stone gargoyles are going to come off buildings and attack people. I don't think it's even possible to concede that that would be literal. It's clearly figurative or spiritual. But instead of circling cities, they're 10 to 15 feet off the ground, attacking people mercilessly, which is a spirit of fear and panic. And so I think we need to deal with a lot of the places that the fear comes is from an inaccurate interpretation, where people who don't have the skill to look at a dream and say, here's the figurative transition, here's what the symbols mean. They're taking the raw data of the dream, thinking it's literal, connecting that with what CNN is telling them and with what their buddy heard down the street and why he's got a whole armament of guns in his basement. And they're thinking, oh my gosh, this is it. We're in the end times. I better dig a bunker. And so what I want to do is I want to put, a source of calm out there and let people know that there's a big difference between literal and figurative things.
Agreed.
And one of the biggest places to look for actionable intel is scripture. As we talked about, just real quick, to go back to dream 1, the fifth and final verse related to brace yourself is only available in the Message interpretation. It's not in the other interpretations. But Dana's talking about protesters in the street, protesters with masks on. He's clearly talking about Antifa, Black Lives Matter. This is what he is seeing in the media representation in his dream. And I came across this verse that has the words brace yourself in it, and it's in the Message translation, and I about fell out of my chair with how accurate this verse is describing what we're seeing, particularly related to the protests in the street. This is Habakkuk 1:1-5 in the Message translation. The headline says, "Justice is a joke." And it says in verse 1, the problem as God gave Habakkuk to see it. God, how long do I have to cry out for help before you listen? How many times do I have to yell, help, murder, police before you come to the rescue? Like, are you kidding me? Like, this is ripped from the headlines. Why do you force me to look at evil, to stare trouble in the face day after day? Anarchy and violence break out. Quarrels and fights are all over the place. Law and order, the phrase that Trump uses all the time. Law and order fall to pieces. Justice is a joke. The wicked have the righteous hamstrung and stand justice on its head. God says, and this is a response, look around at the godless nations, look long and hard, brace yourself for a shock. Something's about to take place and you're going to find it hard to believe. And what I believe that means, and it even goes into the fist punch in November, is God is seeing what's happening too, and he is not silent, and he is going to intervene in a dramatic way into the affairs of men. And this is not going to continue unchecked. God is going to intervene in our country, and something good and dramatic, I believe, is going to happen. And I believe it's going to happen in November.
I agree. Let me, just to clarify and make sure we heard you correctly, is that you do not believe, one, whether there is actual invasion or actual civil war, the dream itself does not lead to that. That doesn't mean that from here on out that things might not change and that might actually happen, but the dream does not lead to that. And you do not believe that we will enter into civil war, or you believe the dream is not telling you that, correct?
I believe the symbols in the dream and the context of the dialect, it went from talking specifically exact quotes from headlines, armed protesters, cities burning. These are headline things. Then they go into roofs of banks being ripped off and money being vacuum cleanered out. Okay, that's not a headline and it's not literal, it's figurative. In that transition, everything that occurs in that transition is figurative, from the gargoyles to the aliens vacuuming banks to the Russian and Chinese soldiers. And so I think contextually, it's almost impossible to say this part of Dana's dream is literal because everything around it is figurative. So I think the data looking at the dream. Now, by the way, Dana is not the first dream that I've gotten about war,
Right.
particularly war in DC, bombs dropping, missiles flying,
Right.
guns, things like that. So I've been analyzing different dreams that look at that. And you have to look at each dream in context, but there are multiple people that are dreaming things like Dana is dreaming. But then when we go back and we say, okay, let's look at it in context. Is this 100% literal? Is this an invasion, a military style invasion, or is this the military generals fighting with Trump about whether we should deploy the National Guard in the streets? You know, it's
Right.
interesting.
And I
because
will say that
Dana had in June, when he saw June, he underlined June, he tapped it 3 times. I looked up June 3rd. And on June 3rd was the day that President Trump deployed the 82nd Airborne to Washington, D.C. That same day, Secretary of Defense Esper called them back. And then he reversed his decision on the callback. All of that happened June 3rd. So when you look at a war between like the Pentagon and the White House, or between military, what we're seeing is a figurative representation of a policy war that was happening between the Secretary of Defense and the White House, because people were alarmed that we're deploying the 82nd Airborne. Now we're thinking people are going to get slaughtered, thousands dead in the streets. That's what, when we think of military invasion, that's what we think. But what it really was it was a back and forth policy issue between the Pentagon and the White House. And we saw that play out. And again, we can prove that with the articles. And not only did it play out in June, it played out June 3rd when he tapped June 3 times, like the exact day that I believe that points to.
Now, I will say, and I want Dana to talk a little bit about October. I will say that that does align with the Q drops, that there will not be, that the playbook is known, that it will not, that civil war will not take place, that yes, we will see military out and about for elections because of the uprising that they are going to try to create. That is true. I believe things can change in the blink of an eye. And I do believe that, one, they will be absolutely trying to bait us into war, but us being a silent majority speaks volumes. You know, they talk about us as silent majority. I think that speaks volumes because we sit back and we watch. We don't have to react. We're not emotional. There's many of us that are just quiet and we're just watching. And we step in as necessary. Dana, talk a little. Can you respond to a little bit about our back and forth, and then kind of go into October, what you felt you'll see in October? Because next week I want to talk about October, and I want to bring in headlines as it happens.
Sure. With John talking about the hyperlinks and the things that he saw in headlines, definitely agree with the assessment. And he and I had talked, and he had shared with me how Joseph saw things from agriculture. So the dreams about the 7 years of good, the 7 years of famine. I do read a lot of news, and mostly it's just the headlines. I don't read every single page. I start in Jerusalem Post, and I go all through Europe, Chinese papers, look for headlines, because I get better news about here everywhere else than here. And so those things help me also to get a better grip on the dream myself, because once again, I'm still kind of in uncharted territory. But I also believe that the dreams all the way through November, we're going to see a lot of crazy things happen. I live in Kentucky, and Louisville's in lockdown right now. I've got friends that are there. I've got a state trooper in my church who is on call basically to go be a part of the SWAT team. They did one indictment, so it's crazy. Portland, Seattle are crazy. I've got a daughter who lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota, goes to college there. Which just even 3 weeks ago, they shut down the highways on her way home from work because somebody was cornered, killed himself, and there was rioting and looting. So these things are, I live in a rural community, but I'm close enough to what's happening around me that these things are in the news. And so people see the news, see what's going on, do a lot of comparisons with the dreams that I've had. But I really believe, going back to what John said, I think when I saw the fist hit in November, it was God's way of saying enough is enough. And in reality, as we're in September, I had the dream about the September Solemn Assembly. Last week, I was in Dallas for a 48-hour prayer and fasting event. Saw over 400 people that were there praying and fasting. I don't know how many online were watching, but I also know that I keep hearing from people every single day, hey, we are praying for America. We're praying for America. People are fasting. People are praying. I believe a lot of folks in the church are waking up. And so because of that, here's the sense that I have. That God said, okay, if you'll wake up during September and get things lined up, the things that do happen in October, November, and the months that follow, you'll be okay. You'll be good with it because you came together in unity. You came together in prayer and fasting, and you came together and said, we're not going to let our nation go. We're going to stand, Lord, we're going to trust you. We're going to repent. We're going to, we're going to stand up and we're going to fight for our nation. So I think that's part of it too. As much as we see the chaos in our world right now, there is a lot of things happening in the supernatural and the spiritual world that we cannot see, but we know it's going on. All of us here sense that there is something just evil in the air. There's malintent. There's awful, evil intentions that are happening, and we as Christians have got to respond to that. And I think more than anything, the reason for the dreams was a warning to America, to the church: wake up, realize what's happening, get your armor on, get your lives ready, get your hearts right with God, because there's a battle coming and you're not ready. So he was trying to say, get up, wake up, get ready. And I kind of look at it this way. I had a brother who could sleep through a freight train hitting the house. I was a light sleeper. So I remember being up, getting ready for school, and my mom would be in there trying to get my brother up, and she waited till like 3 minutes ago, he's got to be out the door. When I saw my mom get a glass of water, I knew that it's about to get real. My brother's about to get out of bed. He's going to be wet. And I think that was kind of like God saying to us. It was like in the dreams, God had the cup of water saying, all right, now no more chances. This is it. Get ready, get up. And so I think God has spoken to the country, not just through my dreams, but other dreams of people, because he's trying to say, wake up. I need you to pray for this nation. I need you to hold the fort, toe the line, and fight for it. So as we get ready to go into October, which I believe that October is going to be contentious, not as much as November, but once again, I think God's trying to get us ready for those things that are coming. So we just got to stay awake and keep fighting.
I agree with you. I do not believe, and according to the cue drops, that there will not be civil war. They've got the playbook. They understand everything that's going on. There will be military there. And, my son, who's in intelligence, even, he stated there, listen, we are well equipped. We are well equipped to handle whatever needs to happen very quickly. We have been practicing for these moments for decades. And with that said, I want to bring, I want to leave you this week with hope, in that take the headlines in October with a grain of salt. Take the headlines. Remember that the media is not your friend, that they are there to bring divisiveness, to divide us as a people. In October, practice the art of love and acceptance. We all believe certain things because we have a different set of facts. Next week, we're going to be talking about October, what Dana saw in October, one of his next dreams. And also with John, we'll be going over some of the intel, more of the intel briefing. John, would you mind linking some of those hyperlinks? Maybe releasing the dossier? I keep getting him to release the dossier.
We can talk about that. It's a lot for people to digest, but
it is a lot. But maybe we could release it in like bite-sized pieces.
Possibly. Yeah.
Yes. So next week we will have Dana and John with us. We're going to talk about some headlines. We're going to be preparing for what's going to happen in October. And we'll bring some more dreams to the table, talk about what that looks like for October. I've got some really exciting dreams that we've been praying through as a ministry regarding some of the assassination attempts and stuff, what we've seen in those dreams, and what we can look forward to, and some answers. So join us next week where Dana and John and I talk about the next set of dreams that Dana had. He had 3, we released 3 in an interview, but he's actually released some more. So we're going to talk about those again. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And if you guys have any questions that you want to ask Dana or John or I, put them down in the description box, underneath the description box in the comments, and we will get to those questions next week. Guys, I appreciate your time. Blessings.
Thank you.
Thank you.